Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. I have been meaning to film this video for so freaking long, but then I just kind of got behind, and then I got lazy, and then I got uninspired, and so I am very excited to finally be filming my mid-year update for you guys. I have so many amazing books that I cannot wait to talk about with you guys, so let's just get started. I'm gonna pull up the prompts on my phone because I don't remember them. I don't even know if I filmed a mid-year freakout last year, so definitely don't remember. The first prompt is to talk about the best book that I've read so far this year. And it is really hard for me to pick just one. So I'm going to talk about some of my top and most noticeable reads from the year, starting with Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. We're following Alexis, who is the daughter of world-renowned surgeons, and she is an ER doctor, and she has notary of her own right, and she's feeling all the pressures of living up to her family's standard and being the daughter that her parents want her to be, and she's running away from this relationship that really just did not serve her. She runs into Daniel in this small town. He's a local carpenter. Her car breaks down and he helps her along the way, and their romance kind of just takes off from there. And Alexis is really torn between her city life and the expectations of her family versus going to live in this wholesome fun community with Daniel and giving up all of the pressures and expectations that she also has for herself. I thought that this book was a great depiction of what it looks like to deal with family expectations, to be the sibling that is trying to hold things together, and what it means to just throw caution to the wind and live your life to the fullest. Cannot recommend this enough. I know that there was a new release by Abby Jimenez that follows a character from this book. I'm really excited to pick that up. I think it's called Yours Truly, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't think I own that one yet. This is like a sign to myself that I need to go buy it. But yeah, one of my top reads for 2023 this far is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Next up, we have On Air with Zoe Washington. This is a sequel to the book From the Deaths of Zoe Washington. We're following 12-year-old Zoe, who is on the hunt for just more knowledge and independence and understanding of the world around her. In book one, we follow Zoe as she reckons with the fact that her biological father is actually in jail, and so she's on the hunt to learn more about trials and convictions and what it's like to live in prison and the quality of life that happens in prison. And it was just such a fun journey, and I loved following Zoe on that. In the sequel, we pick up right where we left off with Zoe in book one, except now she's learning more poignantly about rehabilitation, reform, what it's like when people leave the criminal justice system, how hard it is for them to find jobs, places of employment, how ostracized they are from society, and how people judge them based off their previous convictions, and how even after you serve your time, you still are serving this penance to society. And Zoe is so passionate about this. There's other things that is happening in Zoe's life. For example, she loves to cook and she wants to start her own bakery one day with her father. I feel like the series as a whole handles very delicate topics with a younger audience, and it gets them to understand the reality of our world. It's so inspiring at the same time. It's so hopeful at the same time. And I just love seeing conversations like this had with youth, and I can't wait. If there is a book 3, I'm hoping there is a book 3, I will certainly be pre-ordering that because I have given book 1 and book 2 5 stars each. And then the next 2 books that I'm going to mention, I actually haven't talked about on my channel before because I was filming them in a vlog when I read them. It's not up on my channel yet, but you guys will be able to see my thoughts on these books as I was reading them coming very soon. The first book is going to be Yellowface. I thought this book was maniacal and unhinged, and I had a hell of a time reading it. This is by far my favorite R.F. Kuang book. I don't know that I had really high expectations going into it. Again, you guys are no secret to the fact that I wasn't a fan of the Poppy War. I only read book 1 and decided not to continue with the series, and then I read Babel, and I was thoroughly impressed by the way that she handled the story, but it wasn't like a new favorite for me. I was just like, wow, I can admire her growth as a writer and the story that she told, because Babel is such a badass story. But this one solidified itself as a favorite for me. It's one that I would recommend that everyone pick up if you can be in the head of utterly insane characters and it doesn't really bother you. I thought that this was such a fun time. And then the last one is probably the best, hands down the best fantasy book that I've read in a really long time, and that is The Will of the Many. This is by the same author that wrote the Lycanus trilogy, which is The Shadow of What Was Lost. I'll put the cover up here, but I have so many words and no words for what this story was. This is like if Red Rising and Babel had a baby, it would be The Will of the Many. This is such an epic and deeply political story, and I cannot wait to rave about it some more with you guys. But yeah, it was amazing. If you don't know what The Will of the Many is about, we are following this character named Vis. He is the son of a previous or fallen kingdom, and so he's trying to survive within the empire that has conquered his land and killed his entire family. And the magic system requires for people to cede some energy or will from them to someone that's higher up. And so this entire empire is built off a hierarchy, and Vis refuses to participate. And so he's just really trying to survive within an empire that is trying to swallow him whole. The empire is at this point where they have expanded to its fullest extent. They have conquered and colonized any and everyone that's able to be colonized. And there is some friction from within the empire as everyone starts to turn on each other in the effort to seize power. And so there may be an impending collapse or civil war happening within the empire itself. And as much as Vis doesn't support the empire and the hierarchy and what it stands for, he also refuses to join the rebellion. And so we follow Vis as he is deeply caught up in between refusing to uphold the empire and stopping the collapse, but also refusing to help it along as well. Vis is so strategic as a character. He understands his strengths, he understands his weakness, he's constantly analyzing and processing information and looking around him and paying attention. And that was just so freaking refreshing, because I feel like every single fantasy book that I've read recently, including The Fourth Wing, which we'll talk about later, is filled with characters that have glaring, obvious red flags all around them, and they're choosing to ignore it. And you as a reader are stuck like, okay, well now we have to wait and see how long it's going to take for our main character to notice this and to notice that. This picks up on any and everything. He is committed to his cause, and his cause is pretty much himself. I feel like I understood Vis as a character so much. Like if he was a real person, I feel like I would really truly know him, and I love that. This is a lesson in character study, character art, character development. James was in his bag. 6 out of 5 stars. Run, don't walk. If you're interested in reading a dope ass political fantasy, this is it. The second prompt is to talk about the best sequel that you've read so far this year. I've already talked about On Air with Zoe Washington, so I'm gonna grab a different book for this prompt, and that is going to be Age of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. I have spent the entire first half of the year reading the Legends of the First Empire series, and I am happy to report that I've officially finished. I'm done, and there is 6 books in this series, but the one that sticks with me the most, that just really has my heart, is definitely going to be Age of Swords. What I love about this book the most is that it actually lives up to its name, Age of Swords. This is a prehistoric civilization, and so we're watching them learn to work together, learn to form communities, bigger communities than the tribal ones that they had before. They're playing with iron and copper, and they're developing swords and new ways to fight and new armor. They're also playing around with like numeric systems, alphabetic systems. They're learning how to read and write, and it was just so freaking fun to watch the formation of an entire civilization and an entire society, knowing what I know about the future series and just seeing how they got there, how things were developed. And me as a historian that, you know, has spent time studying the formations of empires, the rise and fall of different societies, this was so fun to see in a fantasy setting, because you have that like thing gripping you to the real world, because you're connecting with them, because you deeply understand what's happening and how revolutionary the things that are occurring within the story is going to be, but they have no idea at the time. And so you're just so excited for the things that they are discovering and making, and you're like, yes, this is what you need, this is what I want to see throughout the entire series, and them being none the wiser of the foundations that they're setting. It was so fun to see, and yeah, this one I think is going to remain my favorite book of the series. Prompt number 3 is to talk about a new release that I haven't read yet, but I want to. For that one, I'm going to select The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. In that unreleased vlog, I was reading new release books, and I was stuck between reading The Book That Wouldn't Burn or The Will of the Many. I'm very excited that I selected The Will of the Many because I had a fun freaking time with that book, but I ended up pushing The Book That Wouldn't Burn further down the list. But I'm hoping to pick it up soon, if not this month, because those two were one of like my most anticipated reads of the year, and I don't want the year to go by without me having read this book yet. I do have, I would say, moderate expectations for this because I recently read the Red Sister trilogy by Mark Lawrence, and it wasn't my favorite. I actually was rather disappointed with it, but I don't necessarily fault Mark Lawrence for that. I think that his writing is something that I could get invested into if the premise and the plot and the characters lined up with my interest, and I don't think that that happened when I tried to read The Red Sister, and so I'm interested to see what he can do with a different premise, and that is going to be this book. The synopsis of this book is very vague. I know that we have a male and female character that are somehow connected deeply with this mysterious and vast library that is ever-changing. Yeah, that's very vague, and so I don't really know what to expect as far as the storyline, but I'm hoping to pick this up sometime soon. The fourth prompt is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. So let me go to my list of pre-orders that I've already pre-ordered and take a look at probably the books that I am most excited for. I would say The Splinter in the Sky, which is set to release July 11th, I'm excited about. Ebony Gate, also July 11th, I'm excited about. A Twisted Love Story, I'm also excited about because it's by Samantha Downing and she writes very unhinged satire, like thriller books, and so I'm looking forward to her newest release. I would also say He Who Drowned the World will probably be in my top spot. It's the sequel to She Who Became the Sun. The further I get away from when I read the book, the more I like fondly remember the story and the more I'm excited about the sequel, and so I'm planning to do a reread of She Who Became the Sun and then picking up the sequel as soon as it drops on August 22nd. I would say that those are the books that I'm most excited about for the second half of the year, but definitely He Who Drowned the World is going to be like one I pick up ASAP. So sorry about that, my camera battery died, but the next prompt is to talk about my most disappointing read of the year, and that has to go to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Not only do I feel like this book is not adequately and appropriately talked about in terms of like what to expect within the story, I also feel like it wasn't marketed right, and so I didn't go into this book with the most realistic set of expectations. Not only that, I also feel like the book took too long to develop plot lines, and in a sense, it made the book rather slow and boring. Even the book is less than 300 pages, and it takes a good chunk of the story before our romance interest is even a part of the plot. Like, we know who he is. She's constantly talking about him, but he doesn't actually enter into the book on page until a good way through. And even more so, I spent a lot of the book wondering if there was even going to be a romance between them, because it just took a really long time to develop. There was no drops or hints along the way. They went directly from like not really being able to stand each other to like becoming an item, and I was just like, there could have been hints along the way. Even the action-based scenes and the plot progression of the story itself takes a really long time to happen. It doesn't occur until the very end of the book, and so I just feel like the first like 60% of the story is entirely wasted because we're just lollygagging and like literally frolicking about, and I was just like, okay, this is pointless. But it didn't give like an ambiance of like, oh, we're just here to like relax, or this is like a cozy story, or this is like a cottagecore type story. It wasn't giving any of those things. It was giving boring throughout the entire freaking book. And I don't find Emily to be the most compelling and like gripping character. There's nothing wrong with her. She can be antisocial, she can be standoffish, it can be really hard for her to communicate with people, but even her internal dialogue and us like getting to know her outside of her very awkward and mostly offensive interactions with other people in the story, I just don't find her to be that interesting on her own. Her love interest is the most fun part of the entire story in and of itself. I wanted more chapters from him. I wanted to see him earlier on page, and I wanted to, like, I don't know, I feel like I would have enjoyed the story more from his perspective and him analyzing her as she is as an individual versus us being stuck in her head. So yeah, I was very excited for this book, very excited to get the arc and the special edition, and it really just let me down. I gave it 1.5 stars. At first I thought that maybe the audiobook would have lent some like personality to the story and I would have liked it more in audio form, but that was because I read it before the book actually released, and so I did sample the audiobook when it dropped, and oddly enough, I have to say now that I probably would have DNF'd the audiobook. I don't think that I would have finished the book if I had read it on audio, and so yeah, I'm wholly convinced at this point that it's not the format that I read it, it's the book itself. And I tried to give and lend a lot of excuses to the story for why I didn't like it, but honestly, it was just boring. The next prompt is my biggest surprise of the year, and that has to go to The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. This was my first time reading from Roshani Shakshni, so I did not read, what is it called, like the Gilded Wolf series. But I also have to say that this one I don't feel like was marketed correctly, because when you read the synopsis, you think that you're really going to be following this man and his very mysterious wife as he learns about her secrets, but it's really not about that. This is about his wife and her weirdly deep connection to a best friend that she had growing up. There is a lot of just magical realism and abstract literary devices that the author's using to tell the story, and so it doesn't really fit wholly into the fantasy genre, because the author is using these as a play on the readers and a play on the story, and making you really guess as to what's happening, because you don't know for sure that there is some magical elements to the story, but you know that something's off and that there's not an explanation for it, and so you're kind of left in this gray area of like, are they suffering from, like, I don't know, some mental instabilities? Or, like, is there a real fantasy aspect to the story? Is what you're saying literal, or are you using this terminology as like a figure of speech? This whole book is like being stuck in the gray. We are following this bridegroom. You never get his name, but he is married to a woman that has made him promise from the very beginning that he would never look into her past and he would never ask questions. And he is seemingly under a spell of hers, and you don't know if he's just really deeply lovesick or if she has put him under a literal spell. And her aunt gets sick. They have to travel back to her childhood home, and the home is speaking to him in a lot of ways. The great aunt is very suspicious, and so he finds himself asking more and more questions about her past, even though he promised her that he never would. And the deeper that he looks, the less things make sense, and that's the experience for you as a reader as well. You're the bridegroom in a lot of ways, because the more you think about the story and the more you think about what's actually happening, the less things make sense to you as well. It's one of those books where on the surface things are like kind of seemingly okay, but the deeper you go, the deeper you get involved, the more the story starts to really unravel, and that was so unexpected for me. That was so fun for me. It's such a middle of the road type book in terms of its genre, and it's not trying hard to impress itself. It's not trying hard to impress you as the reader. The book is what it is, and you take it for what it is and what you perceive it as. I was also very surprised by the writing in this one. It's very lush and flowery. It's very similar to The Starless Sea and The Night Circus, and I wasn't expecting that type of writing going into the story, because I don't think that I've ever heard anyone describe Roshani's writing like that, and I don't feel like it's a type of writing style that's easy to pull off, because if it was, more people would do it, but it definitely solidified her up there with like Bridget Collins, Erin Morgenstern, Laini Taylor, as the authors that can really pull off that type of writing. Shakshni's now up there with those writers for me. The next prompt is to talk about a favorite new author. This year has been a year of Shannon Chakraborty for me. I finally made my way through the entire Daevabad trilogy, and then almost immediately after, I ended up picking up The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. And while I can't say that, I don't think I gave any book in the Daevabad trilogy 5 stars, I did enjoy the story overall. I did enjoy her character work, and I was thoroughly like pleased to know that she's just getting so much better in her character work when I picked up Amina al-Sarafi, because I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed Amina as a character, but I mostly deeply enjoyed the story here, and I'm excited for all the sequels to follow up. I feel like Shannon just has this way of really thinking of really expansive plots and entire lush filled fantasy worlds, and I'm more excited about her stories and the premises of her stories than I am about anything else, and I feel like that makes me want to pick up anything that she writes, just because I feel the same way about her as I feel about N.K. Jemisin. Like, N.K. Jemisin in all of her fantasy books makes really expansive and just deeply detailed fantasy worlds, and you almost want to read everything that she writes just for that alone. I've seen some really great and well-written books that have the most basic of plots that were just executed and done really well, and then I've also seen authors create really massive worlds and are unable to really keep all the balls in the air at the same time and like juggle everything that requires to tell such a vast story. And I feel like Shannon Chakraborty and N.K. Jemisin can do both. They can can give you really original and things that you never would expect to see in a fantasy story, and they can execute it very well. They have the diligence, the patience, and the self strength to stay within the storyline, to give you more when you need more, and to dial it back when you need them to. And so I think just for her worlds alone, I mean, she is a good writer. I do enjoy her stories, but Shannon Chakraborty has solidified herself as a favorite author for me, just because I will find myself intrigued and enticed to keep reading her story just because I enjoy being there, even if I don't like what's happening with the plot and the characters. The next prompt is to talk about my newest fictional crush. I don't really have crushes, but earlier this year I read a book by J.L. Seegers. I think it's called Revive Me, and I really liked Dominic in that story. Like, Dominic, if he was a real person, is someone that I would be romantically interested in. There is things about his character that we would have to really, you know, check, but no one's perfect, and I feel like this is as close to perfection as I can get. And once I work on it, once I chisel away all that negative energy that he doesn't need, baby, he will be perfect. And so my fictional crush, for the first time ever, was Dominic from Revive Me. And it remains Dominic now, even after all of the romance books that I've read so far, and just books in general. Like, I still think that if I had a crush, it'd be Nick. And then I would say a second possible crush would be Leland McLean from Let Me Hold You. This is the sequel to, I can't remember what the name of the first book was, but it's the McLean Brothers series. And I thought that Leland was like laugh out loud, literally funny. I also enjoyed the smut scenes with him as well, but he seems like someone I could really like just vibe with, have a good time with, because even listening to the audiobook during his chapters literally was laughing out loud. So he was such a dope character to follow, and I now am telling myself that I need to read book 3 because I really enjoy book 1 and book 2. The next prompt is to talk about my newest favorite character, and that hands down is Checkin from The God Killer. This was on my June TBR. I'm so excited that I picked it up and read it. I am anxiously waiting the sequel. This book was unexpected in a lot of ways, and while it is not perfect, there is a lot here that is left to be desired in terms of developing out the plot and really building out the world. The story is still enticing, and the characters, this little found group of friends situation that we have going on, was also very interesting to follow. But Checkin is essentially a god killer, and she gives very much the Witcher vibes, very much Geralt of Rivia, but she is a female. She's also disabled. She lost her leg during a tragic incident when she was a younger child, and so Checkin has like a prosthesis leg. But please do not ever think that you're gonna get one up on Checkin because of that, because she is a badass fighter on page, and she is not without merit of her own, and I really enjoyed following her because she is a bit gruff. Checkin as an individual reminds me a lot of Brienne of Tarth, as far as like who she is as a character and her softer sides and how it can be hidden behind a more gruff and standoffish appearance. However, the world itself, the magic system, and Checkin's actual job within the world really gives Witcher vibes at the same time, so I really enjoyed her. Besides this from The Will of the Many, I'm gonna keep harping back to that book because that is how much I loved it. Checkin is my newest favorite character of the year. I support her rights, I support her wrongs, and I support her right to be wrong, most importantly. If you haven't read The God Killer, it's a short read. It's like, I think 285 pages. I think that this book was self-published at first, but it has been picked up by Harper Voyager in the UK, and I know it's set to release in the US later this year. Again, there's a lot here that is still left to be developed, but there's still time because it's the first book in the series, so I'm looking forward to where the author goes next. But I also think that I'm still going to put this on my best of the year at the end of the year because I still loved it despite all its faults. The next prompt is to talk about a book that made me cry, and this one was more of like a happy cry, and that goes to Real by Kennedy Ryan. I read this book earlier this year, and it instantly became, if not my favorite romance ever, one of my favorite romances ever. Our female main character in this story suffers from leukemia, and there is this really authentic and raw scene between her and her love interest in the book, and it had so much vulnerability, so much weakness and strength in it at the same time, so much of bearing yourself completely to someone and them accepting you wholly as you are. And that just touched me so much that I was in tears, because that was just such a beautiful depiction of like love, not like what you fantasize about in your head, and not, you know, the type of love that is shown like on TVs where it's not always realistic. There was just something so utterly authentic and raw about that scene that just gave real life experience, real life trials and tribulations. And I loved how they came to understand one another. I loved how they showed themselves to each other and how that love was reciprocated. And the book in and of itself is about all types of love, whether it's romantic love or love of admiration, love of parent, love of sister, love of friend. Real is a story about love in all of its formats, even though we are following a romantic relationship. But everything about this book just touched me because you get to see the overcoming of obstacles and how love can really withstand any and all things that you experience throughout life. So Kennedy Ryan became a favorite. Real, highly recommend, but it brought me to tears what I seen in this book. The next prompt is to talk about books that made me happy and brought me joy this year, and you absolutely know my first choice for this, and that is going to be The House Witch. I picked up this in a vlog I think a few months ago where I read Cozy Fantasies by indie authors, and this one is the pure definition of absolute cozy fantasy. My goodness. This book is centered around Finn, who is this cook in a castle, and he can be quite abrasive and abrupt and rude to people, but he takes his job as a cook very seriously, and you get to see the behind the scenes happening in a castle from the employees that work there, how the staff interacts with the royal family, how the staff interacts with the knights, and how food can really just, you know, bring joy and wholesomeness to everyone and bring everyone to the table. There's some political things that are happening within the story, but that's happening at a distance. You're mostly just following Finn, and he is such an endearing character to follow, and I really liked his grumpiness, his gruffiness. I really loved watching Finn fall in love with someone, and that is, you know, the sneak peek. The romance is a sneak peek on the cover of this special edition, but this book definitely made me happy this year. I love the descriptions of the food. I loved how Finn challenged everyone around him to be better, to do better, to love harder, and to love more openly of everyone around them, and it was just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. I cannot wait to pick up the sequel, but I'm saving that for later this year because it's going to be one of my like fall winter reads when I want something that I know is really going to pick me up and make me feel all the feels and make me want to love on everyone around me. I want to read that this fall. And then the second honorary mention that I can't just not talk about is going to be Hat Atelier. I'm up to volume 3 now, but I've been reading this with my patrons this year. We have like a monthly TBR, and I've picked up Hat Atelier, and I have had a ball. We're following Coco, who is enraptured with the idea of magic, and she'd love to be a witch, but her heart was basically shattered when she was a kid, when her mom told her that you can't just become a witch, you have to be born a witch, and so that no one else can practice magic outside of this elite group of witches that were born that way. Despite all of that, Coco still loves the idea of magic. She's still fascinated with it, and something happens in book 1 where she is practicing magic that she's not supposed to, and something cataclysmic happens in her life, and so she's taken to this Hat Atelier, which is this school, to learn how to do magic and to control it and to try to undo what she ended up doing when she was practicing magic the first time. I just love Coco's optimism about life, her willingness to learn and reach out. It's a short and quick manga, but it's just brought me so much happiness every time I think about it and pick up the next volume, and I can't wait to read all of them. I didn't mention this earlier in the video, but I did read The Shadow of the Gods for my patron. It was our book of the month pick for the month of May, and I did not like it. It was a big disappointment. I think I gave the book like 1.5 to 2 stars. So yeah, I'll talk about that in detail later, but I did want to mention that that was a big disappointment, and I'm not even sure if my patrons loved it either. The next prompt is the most beautiful book that I have bought or received this year, and I'm gonna go with The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, which was a special book box edition. I love this cover as well as this cover of The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. These are my 2 favorite acquisition special edition books for this year for sure. Honorary mention goes to In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. I also think that this is a very beautiful edition of this book as well. And then the last prompt is to talk about some books that I need to pick up before the year is out. First up, I have The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I know for sure that I'll finish this before the year is out because this is actually my Patreon book of the month pick for the month of July. So hands down for sure I'll be reading The Grace of Kings and I'll be vlogging it. If you would like to join my Patreon, the link is in the description box below. Yeah, join us. We pick a book every month. I read it and vlog my reactions, and yeah, so I'll be reading The Grace of Kings. Then I need to pick up The Lies of Lamora. I've been hoping to read this as a Patreon pick, but it just hasn't been voted for or selected just yet, so maybe I'll be reading this on my own, probably for the TBR bingo that we do on my Patreon, so have to read this before the year is up. Then I have A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. I've been meaning to get to this series for so long, but I was constantly told that I needed to read all the standalone books in between, what is it called, the First Law trilogy, getting over to the Age of Madness, and I just hated that. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to go into the next series. I didn't want to have to boggle myself down with reading like 3 or 4 additional books, including the novellas, but I don't think that I'm going to get around to doing that because 1, I don't really want to, 2, I'm not interested in them at all, and 3, I honestly don't care. I read books how I want to read them, and at this point I'm just ready to go into A Little Hatred, and if I like it enough to where like I've fallen in love with Joe as an author and I want to go back and read some of his backlist, then I feel like then at that point I would read the standalone novels and the novella. But right now I don't like the weight of the obligation to have to pick them up, and I am officially freeing myself of that. So yeah, I will be reading A Little Hatred this year. And then I also have to read Gold, which is book 4 to the Guild series. I also want to read Daughter of No Worlds because I've been seeing a lot of positive things about that. Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo I need to read, and yeah, A Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. Hopefully I pick that up as well. And that pretty much sums up my reading experience for the first half of the year. It doesn't feel like it at the time that I've read as many amazing books as I have, or loved as many amazing books as I have loved, but I like the idea of stopping and doing like a mid-year like temperature check and just taking time to revel in the books that I have enjoyed and have found joy in throughout the year, because when you're reading a really crappy book, sometimes it can really get to you and you feel like, oh my goodness, like why am I reading such crappy books lately? But it is nice to look back on some of my highlights throughout the year. Thank you guys. If you've made it to the end of my video, leave me a witch hat, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!